Hello guys, welcome to another video, and today we're going to be taking a look at the 5 unique items that will drop exclusively from the bosses of the new Tier 17 maps. And these unique items are not actually new uniques, like the gloves or helmet that I talked about in the last few days that are being dropped from the existing Uber boss fights, but they're actually reworked uniques that have been taken out of the core drop pool, and in many cases they've been greatly improved or drastically changed, and are then being made to exclusively drop from the new penultimate bosses, that's the bosses at the end of the Tier 17 maps. We know all of these unique items already, and so far we know 4 of the 5 penultimate bosses. Uber Katarina, which appears to be a merger with Abyss too, since we can see abyssal spires in the footage, so that one may also contain the abyssal liches. Uber Lycia, which seems to also contain Baidat, one of the Beyond bosses. It may also contain the other Beyond bosses as well. There's also Uber Uhtred, an expedition boss, who will also summon 2 additional expedition bosses during the encounter, and an Uber version of the Unbreakable boss from unique heist contracts. I believe the last penultimate boss is currently unknown. Please do let me know if we already know this. It's possible that I've just missed it. So we also know of the 5 unique items. We don't exactly know which bosses will drop which item, but I think we can make some good guesses for that. Firstly, let's start with one of those uniques that wasn't shown in the reveal. That's the Dark Seer Scepter, which is getting a very large buff as a result of this change. The Dark Seer Scepter will now have +2 to the level of all spell skill gems, and it now rolls between 1 and 2 mana and energy shield per level. So with a 2 roll on these 2 mods, you're going to gain a very sizable chunk of mana and energy shield out of this one when you reach high levels. The malediction part of the item has been changed in a really big way too. Previously, this mod required you to be blinded, and then upon inflicting blind on an enemy while you were blinded, you'd inflict malediction as well. But now you don't need to be blinded, you just need to inflict blind, and the item already has a handy global blind chance on it. Malediction is a good debuff. It makes monsters take 10% increased damage and deal 10% reduced damage. And that's really the entire theme of this item. It's very much a middle ground between offensive and defensive, and I really like that sort of thing being available as an option for a main hand weapon. There's no mention of the other versions of Dark Seer in the patch notes, but the way Dark Seer worked is that there were 3 different types of the weapon. One that granted life and mana, one that granted life and energy shield, and one that granted mana and energy shield. And I'm assuming that this version is replacing all 3 of the old versions, and will now be the only one that you're able to obtain going forward. In terms of which boss the new Dark Seer will drop from, I think it will come from the Uber Lycia fight. Dark Seer was a Beyond League unique, and with the Scourge replacing Beyond, I think it makes sense that this item drops from the Herald of the Scourge. Up next is another unique that wasn't shown in the reveal footage. That's the Yoke of Suffering. This amulet is getting a far simpler change in 3.24. The modifier, which makes enemies take increased damage for each different type of ailment that you've inflicted on them, will now have a roll range, going from a fixed 5% increased damage taken to 5 to 10% increased damage taken. And this amulet was already good, and making enemies take increased damage is a very powerful stat on a lot of builds, especially the type of builds that want to make use of this, because they often only have one other source of increased damage taken on enemies, which is shock. So I expect this new version of Yoke of Suffering to be used quite a bit. And I think this one will drop from the Uber Unbreakable fight. I don't have good reasoning for that, other than I think the other uniques make sense dropping from other bosses, which we'll talk about in a moment. So let's get on to the next unique. This one was shown in the reveal. It's the massively improved Wraithlord helmet. This is just insane. So this helmet now has 4 abyssal sockets and allows you to have an extra maximum spectre per socketed ghastly eye jewel. So that's going to be an extra 4 maximum spectres, and it also has +1 to 2 to the level of all minion skill gems as well. And really, this one has to be the most absurd of these 5 reworked uniques. It is just crazy. There's even going to be some new spectres in this league, I believe, so it's possible that they might include some of the spectres from Affliction, like the Dark Marionette, who knows. If there's any good new spectres, I have a feeling it's going to be a Necromancer Spectre league for a lot of people. And the new Wraithlord, I think it will drop from the Uber Katarina / Uber Abyssal Lich fight. That makes the most sense. Next up is the other unique that was shown in the reveal, that's the Manastorm shield. I really love what they did with this one. So this shield makes you sacrifice all of your mana whenever you cast a spell, and added maximum lightning damage is gained based on the amount of mana sacrificed. As part of this change, the percentage on this modifier went from 25% to 50%, so you'll now gain added maximum lightning damage equal to 50% of the mana sacrificed. You can imagine just how much added damage that can be. Be aware that this is added maximum damage, so you'll want a source of lucky lightning damage if possible. But that's not the only change that they made to this item, because they're also adding 2 new stats and changing 2 old stats. And it will now have a ridiculous roll range for 4 modifiers on the item, that's maximum mana, mana regeneration rate, mana per enemy killed, and mana recovery from flasks. 1 to 100. Good luck divining that one. I think the new Manastorm shield will probably drop from the Uber Uhtred fight, but the only reason I have for this one is the reveal footage which showcased this item with the character standing in Uhtred's arena. Lastly, we have the improved Malachai's Mark gloves. If you don't know how these gloves work, they grant a buff every 6 seconds which rotates through Malachai's Endurance, Malachai's Frenzy, and Malachai's Power. These buffs used to provide a 20% chance to gain an Endurance, Frenzy, or Power charge on kill, the type of which was based on the type of buff, for example Endurance charges from Malachai's Endurance. But in 3.24, the chance to gain charges will instead be changed from 20% chance from kills to 10% chance from hits. And this means that you will now be able to use these gloves to gain Endurance, Frenzy, and Power charges in boss fights, which is quite powerful. You will need a somewhat decent hit rate at only 10% chance, and you'll also be wanting to invest into some charge duration if you want to keep the charges up. Now, if the other predictions for which boss drops which unique are correct, that would leave these gloves being dropped by the final, currently unknown penultimate boss. So, Uber Malachai, anyone? Overall, I'm a big fan of this change, and I really enjoy the idea of these new penultimate bosses having some powerful uniques that can be target farmed. I also think it's great that they took some unique items from the core drop pool to rework instead of only making new ones, as in the case of several of those uniques, they were previously not really used in any builds. What do you think of these reworked unique items, and what about that last unknown penultimate boss? Give me your thoughts in the comments section below. Shout out to my patrons, thank you for supporting my channel. If you'd like to join them, you can find out all of the information on the new Patreon that I've set up. The link is in the description below. Thanks for watching this video, and I'll see you in the next one.